All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started. My name is Chris Jones. I'm the director of the Center for Substance Abuse Prevention at SAMHSA. Thanks very much for joining the webinar today. And as you all know, in October, we are celebrating Substance Use Prevention Month, and our overall theme is telling the prevention story. And the webinar today is really focused on those state stories, but we've had two other webinars over the past month in October to tell sort of the local coalition story that we did in collaboration with CADCA. And then we kicked off Prevention Month with a webinar with several of SAMHSA's CSAP grantees talking about their work, both at the state and the local level as well. And really excited to be joined today by some of our key state partners and Rob Morrison from NASADAD to again really lift up the incredible work that's happening across states. And certainly in CSAP, we want to raise up the importance of prevention every day. But I think Prevention Month in October really gives us an opportunity to take stock of where we are as a prevention field, to celebrate our successes, and to recognize the challenges that we face in advancing prevention work. Young people, families, communities are facing a range of challenges. We still have historically high rates of overdose death, prevalence of substance use, mental health challenges, interrelated challenges that are playing out that really underscore the importance of prevention in bringing a comprehensive and holistic approach to the prevention work. And in CSAP, we have a vision for our prevention work that is really a future where individuals, families, communities are healthy and thriving. And I think that is really the ultimate goal that we're all working towards in the prevention work, whether you're doing it at the community level, at the state level, tribal, jurisdiction, territorial level. And it's so critical that we get together to share our innovations, to share our successes, because we are part of a collective community that is working towards that ultimate vision. So today is just one component of that broader conversation, and really appreciate our partners being here. So we do have some specific state presentations, but before we do that, I want to turn it over to Rob Morrison, who many of you know as the leader of NASADAD, who is a key partner for us at SAMHSA in the prevention space, in the treatment space, and certainly a key player in helping states work with SAMHSA and advance the prevention work that's happening across communities. So Rob, let me turn it over to you.
Well, thanks, Chris. And as Chris said, I serve as executive director of the National Association of State Alcohol and Drug Agency Directors. We're also known as NASADAD. And we're a national nonprofit composed of leaders from state and territorial alcohol and drug agencies from across the country. And speaking of which, it's neat to see so many states represented on this very call. Our mission at the association is to help promote effective and efficient state substance use systems across the continuum: prevention, treatment, recovery, as Chris said. We're located in Washington, D.C., governed by a board of directors with our current president, Sarah Goldsby from South Carolina. I too want to recognize Substance Use Prevention Month. As Chris said, this is an opportunity for us to share, to promote the good work we do across states, locals, the providers who are the ones to engage every day to make prevention work across so many areas. So I'm thrilled to see so many on the call. I particularly looking forward to hearing about innovations and preventions from different states a little later. I can't hand over the microphone, though, without recognizing Dr. Chris Jones for his leadership of SAMHSA Center for Substance Abuse Prevention. He and his staff are wonderful partners, and I encourage you, if you haven't had direct contact with CSAP, to do so, to go on SAMHSA CSAP webpage, to engage, because our experience is that they want to hear about your experience, and it's important to them. It's important to us continue to learn about the good work moving forward. From there, Please know that in addition to state directors, our membership includes component groups. These are made up of staff to state directors that focus either on a particular population or a particular part of the continuum. The very first component group ever to be created was the National Prevention Network, also known as NPN. And every 2 years, the NPN gathers to choose a president as its leader. And this is a key role. This is a very important position in that the president of NPN sits on the board of directors of NASADAD. And this is to ensure a voice for prevention in leadership. Today, I have the privilege of introducing the NPN president from the great state of New York, Pat Zuber-Wilson. Pat, thanks for your leadership, and I'll hand the mic to you.
Pat, you're on mute.
It's been 4 years, and at least once a meeting, I get the message that I'm on mute. So good afternoon, everyone. Rob, thank you. Thank you for your support. I also want to thank CAPT Jones and the team from CSAP for coordinating this recognition of National Substance Use Prevention Month. I also want to thank SAMHSA and CSAP for their ongoing support and technical assistance to the prevention system. Know that it is truly appreciated by all of us. I also want to thank all of you that are participating in this webinar today because you are our champions. We are here to recognize the prevention services that you deliver, youth, young adults, families, and communities. You make a difference. As Rob mentioned in his introduction, I am the Associate Commissioner for the Division of Prevention Services at the New York State Office of Addiction Services and Supports. When people think of New York, the first thought that comes to their mind is the skyline of New York City. But once you go past the bright lights of Broadway, you'll find that New York is a large, diverse state with cities, suburbs, and rural communities. And New York provides funding and support to 62 counties across our state, 145 prevention programs, and approximately 150 coalitions. Just wanted to give you a little picture of where I come from. Similar to prevention services delivered in our state, prevention strategies are rooted in SAMHSA's strategic prevention framework, using data, evidence-based practice, risk and protective factors. These are our North Star when it comes to planning services for youth, young adults, families, and communities. As president of the National Prevention Network, I have the honor of working with state prevention directors from across the country and territories. And I must say, the state prevention directors are dedicated, energized group of public servants. And I must add that every time I meet with the prevention directors from across the country and territories, I learn something new to better the work and the delivery of services in my state. As we talk about the prevention services we oversee, as different as our states are and the territories are, there's a common thread: the use of prevention science to guide our work, the use of that data, risk and protective factors, building capacity, and evaluation. These are the guiding principles of our work. And we understand the components of prevention science. The question is, how do we as a field talk about prevention in a way that people understand the strategies planned by data and by research? The National Prevention Network is working with the team at NASADAD and CSAP to explore ways to communicate prevention in ways that the public, educators, policymakers, communities, and others will understand our work and the prevention science. This work aligns with Captain Jones and the CSAP vision to elevate the discussion of prevention. This is why 2024 Substance Use Prevention Month theme, telling the story of prevention, is so important. as we continue to bring understanding about the prevention science and celebrate the successes of prevention across the country. In closing, I want to thank all of our colleagues in the field of prevention for their amazing work. You make a difference in the lives of youth, families, and communities. And now I will turn it back to Captain Jones to introduce our first presentation. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Rob and Pat. Really appreciate the partnership and the leadership. And, Pat, you have been a champion on raising the visibility of Prevention Month. And I think it is, again, such an opportunity for us to build that chorus of prevention. And I'm excited to be joined by two of our state leaders. I too love engaging with the prevention leadership in states, hearing about your successes, helping to elevate those things, hearing about your challenges, and figuring out how we can help support the important work that you're doing in communities. So we're going to have two presentations. Michelle Nienhuis will be our first presentation. She's the manager of Prevention and Intervention Services, South Carolina, Department of Alcohol and Other Drug Abuse Services. And that'll be followed by Megan Scott, who's the Substance Use Prevention Program Manager at the Maine Center for Disease Control and Prevention, folks who I always enjoy getting to meet at various times throughout the year and to get feedback on how we're doing in CSAP and how we can work and partner together. So Michelle, hopefully I said your name right. And then I'll turn it over to you to get started on the presentation.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. So I'll go ahead and get you to advance the next slide because I'm going to try to go through this very quickly today. But what I'm hoping to share with you a little bit today is just South Carolina's insights on strategies being employed at the state and local level to address the issue of underage drinking. I'm going to highlight the importance of the 4 C's. We talk about those pretty often here in our state: communication, cooperation, collaboration, and coordination, because I think those are the fundamental pieces of how we get our work done to achieve those outcomes at the state and local level. And then last but not least, what's every good presentation without some data? So I'll certainly share with you some of the outcomes and successes that we've seen by implementing these initiatives throughout the last several years here in our state, and talk to you a little bit about those success stories. So next slide, please. So the problem of underage drinking in South Carolina probably doesn't look much different than it does in other states. Certainly, sometimes our data looks a little bit different, but when we look at the national level and state level, we do see that underage drinking is still one of those major focuses that we want to put our resources and time and attention to as it relates to primary prevention. And in our state, in South Carolina, our primary prevention funding does come from the Substance Use Prevention Treatment Block Grant, Recovery Services Block Grant, and has for many years. I've been fortunate enough to be with the state for about 23 years now, and this has definitely been the underpinning of what we do in the state of South Carolina. We do receive a little bit of state funds, and with the leadership of our director, Sarah Goldsby, we are certainly hoping and looking for more state resources to come for all of our services, but primary prevention as well. But we primarily rely on that block grant. And so the block grant is what our agency is overseeing and providing to our local authorities. Within our state, if you haven't been to visit our state or familiar with our state, we have 46 counties, and we have 31 local county alcohol and drug abuse authorities that receive the funding and provide the very important services at the local level. So as you can tell from the numbers, some of those local county agencies are servicing more than one county area. So all 31 agencies are reaching out and reaching the citizens of South Carolina through the 46 counties that they serve. And we have a little over 5 million people in South Carolina. So that's kind of an idea of our population. But this is our goal. This is just one of our goals. We have a few others, but I'm going to concentrate on this one today. So this is our goal around reducing underage alcohol use. And you can see our very distinctive measures there. So we want to look at 30-day use rates from our Youth Risk Behavior Survey. We also do a Communities That Care survey on the even years. So we also want to look at 30-day use rates as it relates to our CTC survey. And then we also look at retail access as it relates to our underage buy rate, and we're measuring that to see if we can see reductions in that buy rate. So those are our primary objectives, goals and objectives for addressing the issue of underage drinking. Next slide, please. So like every good presentation, you got to know a little bit about the history. And like I said, I've been fortunate enough to be with the state for about 23 years now, and joined the agency back when I was young in my career, and have been fortunate enough to stay with it. But prior to me coming here, first little bullet point, we had in 1993 a community trials research effort that was led by Dr. Harold Holder. And some of you may know or have heard of Dr. Holder. He's kind of what I refer to as the grandfather of environmental strategies. And he conducted a research study where Florence, South Carolina was part of that research study. And through that research study, they were looking at the importance of communities being involved in compliance checks and retail alcohol sales to minors, and how to prevent businesses from selling to minors. So that happened, that research project happened in 1993. And we started to look at some of the lessons learned, but not till about 10 years later. So if you click the next little bullet point, in 1998, the state started to receive funding from the Enforcing Underage Drinking Laws program, or the UDL program. It was a block grant that was provided by the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Programs. And at that time, unfortunately, we didn't let the research really guide what we were doing all that well. We were really mainly looking at that block grant addressing things like alternative events and social norms campaigns, but we didn't really pay a lot of attention to the research that was happening and that had just been done previously in our state as it related to really how we could look at addressing the issue of underage drinking. But next slide, if you fast forward a little bit in time, just like all good lessons are learned, we came back around to that science. And in 2002, we actually received a special discretionary grant from UDL, and it was to really look at implementing a comprehensive approach to addressing underage drinking with a partnership between prevention and enforcement, and really trying to bring about the awareness piece of community engagement, and bringing those partners together to address the issue. And it was predicated on looking at, let's implement environmental prevention strategies that have proven through science to be effective in communities, and how can we replicate that at a local level. So the state received this extra discretionary grant from UDL, and we said, before we make any big changes to the way we've been doing things, let's try this in a couple of communities and see what kind of outcomes we get. And so we funded 3 counties in our state to kind of start this process. And then if you fast forward to the last little bullet point on this slide, in 2005, we actually said, okay, this has been successful enough now through our discretionary grant that we want to take this approach statewide. And we want to take this concept of being able to look at community coalitions, community preventionists, and law enforcement working together in a partnership, hand in glove, to really implement and build capacity to implement environmental strategies in our state. And so that's kind of where our alcohol enforcement team initiatives were born. So we started at that time to shape the way our EUDL block grant was being allocated, to now kind of shift the focus a little bit from some of those strategies that maybe weren't showing as much evidence to work to being successful and working to evidence-based strategies that were. And so if you go to the next slide, like I said, this was kind of the creation of our alcohol enforcement teams. And this model is really looking at building that relationship between community coalitions and law enforcement to come together as a partnership from a multi-jurisdictional and multi-sectional area to see what is driving underage drinking at the local level. What are those areas that need some work? Where's the most problems are associated? Is it the retail environment? Is it the social environment? Is it a combination of both? And what strategies can they implement together to be able to make change? And so it's about reducing that access to alcohol through the various strategies. It's about ensuring that we can measure and track and improve all of the types of programs and strategies that we are implementing, and that they're done kind of hand in glove with research-based guiding us. And really, the most important piece is that community support, and the community support that needs to be developed for not only the enforcement strategies to happen, but for the community to be behind what's happening at a local level for the change to happen. So it's about making those local changes. Next slide, please. So over the course of time, funding has kind of come and gone. And what we've done with these to keep this program going is we have utilized at the state level our puzzle pieces, and we've tried to continue to fit them together the best we can. It's kind of like, you know, when you're putting together a puzzle, sometimes you think the pieces fit, and then you realize, no, actually that one doesn't quite fit, and I've got to take that one apart, and I've got to put this one and try this one. Oh yeah, this one's fitting better. So we've kind of put the puzzle pieces together over the years, and as some funding streams have depleted or gone away, other funding streams have stayed consistent. And of course, every funding stream has its own set of guidelines, its own restrictions, and we have to be very cautious to make sure that we're following those guidelines. But this is kind of an idea of how we put those funding puzzle pieces together to sustain these efforts from a statewide perspective. So currently in our state, we have all of our alcohol enforcement teams supported through not only the use of some of our block grant resources, but through other resources that have come into the state at various times. So at some points in times, we've had strategic prevention framework, and discretionary grants. We've had some of the COVID-19 and ARPA funds that came available, supported some initiatives. We've had local coalitions that have applied for DFCs, where the drug-free communities grants could support additional things happening at the local level. But we've been able to kind of put those puzzle pieces together in all different ways throughout the course of time. And really the success is this is happening at the local level, and it kind of matriculates up to the state level and vice versa. Next slide, please. So those primary elements of communication, cooperation, collaboration, and coordination. Like I said, these 4 C's cannot be overstated. We are constantly working on this. We're constantly working on ways to ensure that we can communicate more effectively and efficiently with each other, how we can cooperate with both state partners so that state partners at our level can cooperate better with local partners, and local partners can then demonstrate that at a local level, how we can collaborate, and most importantly, how we can coordinate. Because we don't want to see that our resources are being duplicated in any way, shape, or form. We want to make sure that everything's kind of coming together to create the best environment that we can. And like I said, this is happening both at the state and local level. And it's really about just trying things, seeing what fits, being willing to take it apart if needed and rebuild it. And that's sometimes what has to happen. You know, after time, sometimes you have to change the approach of what you're doing and being willing to rebuild as needed. Next slide. Some of the initial steps that we took towards collaboration, this kind of gives you an idea of that flow chart that we had at the beginning of this project. So we took that initiative that we had of the EUDL discretionary grant, and we said, what were the core pieces that really worked well that we want to replicate as we move this statewide? And what we saw was a coordinator was an essential linchpin. This coordinator position, if you will, is extremely important both at the state and local level, because it allows for someone to be the key collaborator, the key communicator, the one who can kind of be the go-between, the one who's able to kind of be the master puzzle worker, if you will, that can put the pieces together. So at the state level, we really look at trying to ensure that when we have these bi-monthly meetings that we have, and with our state being a small state, we're able to do this both at an in-person level as well as a virtual level. So we alternate how we do that, but we do definitely get a lot out of being together in person as much as we can. And when we have those meetings, we try to bring in those state partners that can not only demonstrate information, but share skills. So for instance, at one of our local coordinator meetings recently, we had the Department of Motor Vehicles Fraud Unit come in and talk about the issues related back to fraudulent IDs and some of the things that they were seeing, so that when we're doing merchant education in our communities and when we're sharing this information with our law enforcement, they can know some of the key things that South Carolina Department of Motor Vehicles was seeing as it related to how South Carolina IDs were being replicated and manufactured in the cyber world of people ordering fake and fraudulent IDs, for instance. We had the Department of the Department of Natural Resources come in and share information, because we're a big state as it relates to boating and water safety and things like that. Well, they were sharing relationship information about boating under the influence and how they have to go through and make cases related to BUIs, and how they could coordinate with the local law enforcement partners to educate them more on BUI and get them up to speed on things. So that's just some examples of how we try to look at those meetings being a linchpin place of sharing information between our state partners and our local agencies. And then the local agencies are able to take that information that they share back to their local partners. Next slide, please. Training is an essential piece, and we recognize this from the beginning. So free training is always offered, and we have worked with our South Carolina Criminal Justice Academy, as well as our certification body here that works with our prevention specialists, to ensure that all of the courses that we offered are able to be recognized for credentialing for both law enforcement and our prevention partners. But this is just a small sampling of some of the trainings that we've put together. We have training teams that go out from here, from the state agency, but we partner with our locals. So we have local members on our training team. So we have law enforcement representatives, so they can train with us. We have local preventionists that are on our teams that train with us as well. And that way the information is consistent. It's based off of the standards and the best practices, but we also add the South Carolina specific information. So South Carolina specific laws, policies, et cetera, get infused into those trainings. The next couple of slides, I'm going to kind of just leave up on the screen for a second, but I'm going to go through them quickly for the sake of time. But I wanted to demonstrate what activities are taking place at the local level. So you can see that some of the strategies that are being implemented. So compliance checks, public safety checkpoints, saturation patrols, shoulder taps, control party dispersals. These are some of the environmental strategies that are taking place all across the state. Next slide focuses in on our merchant education. So we have a program called the Palmetto Retailers Education Program. It is a state-specific merchant education program that focuses on sharing those best practices with our merchants as it relates to ensuring that they are following the laws and not selling to minors or to those that are visibly intoxicated. Next slide. Another piece that the alcohol enforcement teams do in a collaborative method and way across their communities is certainly information dissemination strategies. Everything from public presentations, PSAs, ad campaigns. We have those at the state and local level. We provide social media calendars on a regular basis so that counties and communities can share information from a social media perspective on those channels. But then they also get out and do all the local events. So they do the health fairs, the speaking engagements, the school presentations, et cetera. And so these are just some pictures from that. And also our next slide, in that same vein, they do a lot around prom season. We have a campaign called Out of Their Hands. And this campaign has been something that the state coordinators decided, probably about 10 years ago or so, that we wanted to have a coordinated campaign at the state and local level during the prom and graduation seasons, where we could remind visibly people to keep alcohol out of the hands of our youth. And so this is some examples of those communities getting out there doing the Project Sticker Shock, but they do a lot of things during the Out of Their Hands campaigns. They do increased enforcement, they do increased education, they do a lot of speaking engagements and community activities, and of course, social media. Last but not least, I'll share the community-based trainings. So then the community-based process vein of the CSAP strategies, we're doing trainings that are involving the community, and they're bringing in partners at the local level to participate in these trainings. So as I end up the presentation for today, I want to just share some of the data so you can see some of the outcomes that we've seen over the past many years as we've been implementing this comprehensive approach in our state. So first, I'll share with you some of that process data. So we created data collection forms and systems that through the evolution of time, they were paper forms at one point in time. Now, thank goodness, they're web-based forms and part of our reporting system. But we gather this information from our communities and we give it back to them so that they can use it in many different ways. This is just some of the raw numbers. But the neat thing about like the compliance check data, because we gather not only what type of establishment it was, what type of product they bought, what time of day, the race, gender, ethnicity of the clerk, the seller, etc. When we give that information back to them, they can take that and see how that differs from community to community and really hopefully help them shape their efforts in the future as it relates to reaching out to those businesses. Next slide. As we get into outcomes, next slide. One of the things that we were able to do because of the comprehensive data that we've collected across the state, we were able to work with the researchers and really do a 10-year study of how alcohol compliance checks, because that is the one strategy that we can comprehensively say has been done all across the state. There are a lot of the strategies that's been done here and there and everywhere, but alcohol compliance checks were the mainstay, if you will, with merchant education and public support of those alcohol compliance checks. We did a 10-year study to see the rate and the effect that we were having as it relates to the impaired driving crashes and the crash rates in our state. Next slide, please. So just a quick bit about that study. We saw that about 80% of the underage population in South Carolina were exposed to regular compliance checks by the end of 2016 when we looked at what we had done in 2006 all the way to 2016. We saw an 18 to 29% decline in underage drinking and driving crashes over the course of that 78 months of the stable compliance checks. And so far, we aren't aware of any other states that have been able to replicate this, but we'd like to see and work with other states if there are any states that have been able to replicate something like this to see, what impacts could we see nationwide. So that's just kind of a quick summary of that research article. Next slide, please. This is just a visual representation of the data. So the black line there at the top shows the trend analysis related to crash rates in our state of over 21 drivers during that 78-month time period, versus you can see the red line shows that decline of under 21 age drivers as it relates to impaired driving crashes in our state over that 10-year time frame. Next slide. And I'm just going to end up with some of the data that I started with. So you may remember some of those main goals that I showed at the very beginning where we said we wanted to look at our YRBS data, our CTC data, and our buy rate. So we can see that from 2005, which was just before this initiative went statewide, to currently 2021 and or 2019 data, we've seen decreases on the students riding with a drinking driver, the students reporting drinking alcohol before the age of 13, and students reporting drinking alcohol in the past 30 days. So you can see some of those decreases there. Next slide, please. On our Communities That Care survey, you can go to the next one. On our Communities That Care survey, we started that survey in 2010. And we were at 35.3% of our students reported drinking in the past 30 days. And this past spring, when we did the survey in 2024, we were down to 7.4% of students reporting drinking in the past 30 days. And then I'll end on our next slide, and it is our alcohol compliance checks. So this looks at the buy rate, and you can see that in 2007, when we started this initiative statewide, we were at 20.3% for alcohol buy rate. And, it's come waxed and waned over time, but we hit 8.9% in our last year, 2023 state fiscal year. And then the orange is our tobacco, because we also do that. So the orange is showing you the tobacco buy rate there. So I'll end there. Thank you so much for letting me share a little bit about what we've done in South Carolina. But like I said, community collaboration, communication, cooperation, coordination, it's extremely important to get this work done at the state and community levels.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Really appreciate the great work in South Carolina, and I really love landing on those outcomes as the final things that you presented, because so often, we're talking to policymakers or others and, decision makers, and they're like, well, how do you know that prevention works? Well, you showed exactly the progress that we have been making in prevention, like substantial reductions in a variety of indicators, right? Not a single indicator, but like collectively, the work that you're doing is connected to the declines that you're seeing. And I think it's just so important that we're able to lift those things up to really show the value and impact of prevention. So once again, thanks so much. And I'll just note that we're not taking live questions and answers, but the chat is certainly very active. So if you do have questions or want additional information, please put that information in the chat. So now I'm going to turn it over to Megan Scott from Maine, who will be our second presenter. Megan.
All right, thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me to share about the first year of what we're calling the Maine Youth and Young Adult Screening, Brief Intervention, and Referral to Treatment School-Based Health Center Pilot. But before I get started today, I just wanted to acknowledge that I'm presenting on the traditional lands of the Wabanaki people. I wanted to take a moment to pay respects to elders, both past and present. Next slide, please. Today I plan to quickly go through a review of the project, talk about implementation in year one, and take a look at some of the preliminary data. That word. Next slide, please. So our project review. Next slide. To start with a bit of background, in 2021, Maine CDC's Tobacco and Substance Use Prevention and Control Program recognized a gap in our prevention work. Ultimately, our goal always is with adolescents is to delay the onset of use as long as possible, but our youth survey data demonstrates that young people are using substances for a variety of reasons. So we decided to explore opportunities for expanding preventive screenings in school-based settings as a tool to help identify risky use patterns early. In collaboration with multiple offices in Maine's Department of Health and Human Services, we developed a plan which included hiring a project coordinator and conducting an assessment to gain a better understanding of current SBIRT implementation throughout the state. Our team then worked with our evaluator to complete that in-depth assessment and the environmental scan in 2022. Elements from similar programs in Washington State, Colorado, and Massachusetts were heavily drawn from for the development of the protocol that we eventually implemented. The project coordinator also met with multiple partners in the state and private sectors to better understand existing adolescent substance use resources and services that we had in Maine. Part of this effort was focused on building a resource directory for youth-based treatment providers in the counties that had at least one school-based health center. Next slide. So the project objectives that we created based on the results of our assessment and the planning stages were to implement SBIRT in school-based health centers, integrate motivational interviewing techniques, improve training and technical assistance initiatives, and expansion of behavioral health staffing in schools, which was key to the success of this project, and data collection and evaluation to inform the feasibility and transferability of SBIRT in school-based settings. Next slide. So I suspect that many of you already know that SBIRT is a comprehensive and integrated public health approach that is implemented in a variety of settings to provide opportunities for early intervention with those using substances before more severe consequences and long-term addiction occur. So the SBIRT technique includes screening to quickly assess the severity of substance use and identify the appropriate level of intervention or treatment, a brief intervention that's focused on increasing insight and awareness regarding substance use and motivation toward behavioral change, and then referral to treatment for those identified as needing more extensive treatment with access to specialty care. Next slide, please. So now I'll move on to talking about what the first year of implementation looked like. So in the spring of 2023, funding to participate in year one of the MyESPERT pilot project was offered. The opportunity for funding was limited only to schools in Maine that had a school-based health center. Based on this application, we were able to fund 3 school sites for this first year. As a provision of the funding, the pilot sites had to agree to verbally conduct ESPERT with all students enrolled in the site's school-based health center using the CAPT 2.1+N tool at least once annually, commit to increasing student enrollment in the site's school-based health center, utilize the REACT positive reinforcement model and the BNI brief intervention framework based on screening results, provide school-based treatment and make appropriate external referrals to specialty care when necessary, and then finally collect aggregate data using a provided data collection tool for the screening conducted, and then submit a de-identified data summary and qualitative report at the conclusion of the project period. Next slide, please. So the protocol's activities and requirements document provided guidelines for utilizing each of these brief intervention models below to address the student screening result. So REACT is a framework for positively reinforcing non-use by students. And the BNI brief negotiated interview is a framework for eliciting current motivations for change and a guide for making a safety plan. Next slide, please. So referral to treatment is something that we try to think about really intentionally. Maine, like probably many other states, is limited in its substance use treatment offerings, especially for adolescents. The screening tools and brief intervention frameworks that ESPERT embeds provide guidelines around when it's appropriate to make a referral, but protecting confidentiality while capitalizing on an individual's motivations for change remains difficult. So I'll be talking a bit about what the treatment components look like for students during this pilot in a few slides. School-based health centers are in a really strong position to meaningfully engage students in a variety of treatment options that are appropriate for their reported use. And they can follow up with additional visits. They can make internal referrals for counseling and support warm handoffs to external providers when needed. The relationships cultivated by school-based health center providers are crucial in boosting linkages between the adolescent and potential resources for making healthy choices, and is bolstered by the integration within a student's daily environment, which again, makes the school-based health center, uniquely appropriate for this type of screening. Next slide, please. So, over a little bit of our data. First, I wanted to just talk about some of the limitations. This is just a new first-year pilot project. So, these slides, I'll include information in aggregate, meaning that it's a compilation of the data summaries from all 3 participating sites. It's also important to just restate that because this project is a pilot, we can't compare information year after year or make any causal conclusions about what this information is telling us in the long run, but we can examine and discuss some of the interesting things we're seeing from this initial iteration. I also want to mention that there are a few slides where data has been suppressed to protect confidentiality, where there were less than 10 respondents under an answer. Next slide. Okay. In this first year of the pilot, 3 school-based health centers screened a total of 386 students and made 50 follow-up referrals, with most screenings occurring for students in grades 9 and 10. An additional 21 students who were eligible to receive the screening opted out during the required verbal assent. Next. So once students consented to the screening, the provider proceeded with the pre-screening questions from Part A of the CRAFT 2.1+N. The exact wording for the pre-screening questions is listed here, and we will definitely be sharing the slides because there's a lot here, a lot to process. But we just wanted to make sure that when people review later, they do have the questions to compare. So of the students who identified that they used any substance on 1 or more days in the preceding 12 months, the percentage of use reflected by the three sites was 9.07 for both alcohol and cannabis, and 8.81% for commercial tobacco and nicotine products. When we look at these graphs, it's important to remember that since we receive data from each site in aggregate, we can't specifically identify any co-use behavior. Next slide. When looking to compare substance use results, we took the total number of days for all students who reported using a particular substance in the past 12 months, and then determined the average number of days each individual student used the substance. So, for example, with cannabis, of the just over 9% of students who reported 1 or more days of cannabis use in the past 12 months, the total number of days of use across those students was 2,243 days, with the average number of days of cannabis use for an individual student being 64.09. And you'll see for tobacco and nicotine use, it was as high as 124 days of individual use. So, and this is raw data from a very small sample size, but it's interesting to consider that even though the percentage of students who reported 1 or more days of use for alcohol, commercial tobacco and nicotine use, and cannabis were fairly evenly spread, the frequency of commercial tobacco and nicotine use was reported at higher rates among students screening positive. Well, we can't say why this is for certain. Some of the possibilities we considered were the fact that commercial tobacco and nicotine use, specifically vaping, is a daily use substances versus something that might be used socially, like alcohol at a party with friends. Next slide, please. So then if a student screened negative for all questions on Part A, the provider followed up by asking just the C question of the CRAFT, responding with positive reinforcement as a plan for safety if a student reported riding in a vehicle with someone under the influence of substances. The student screened positive for 1 or more days of use to questions 1 to 3 in Part A. The provider was prompted to ask the student all the questions in the CRAFT, resulting in a score between 0 and 6. Since students were self-reporting, it is possible that a student reported use but still received a CRAFT score of 0. Since all students screened in this pilot are under the age of 21 and cannot legally purchase any adult use products, providers were directed to give a brief intervention regardless of any Part B or Part C scores. So next slide, please. Of the students who were screened on Part B of the CRAFT, the percentages who responded yes to each question are shown here on this slide. Based on student responses, students were more likely to respond with a yes to using substances to relax and using them alone than yes to the other questions, with 67% and 48% respectively. I didn't want to go, next slide, thank you. So as far as the score distribution, this graph reflects the percentage of students who received a specific score on the CRAFT, not a cumulative score. So a score of 1 or 3 versus 1 or higher or 3 or higher. So 80.42% screened negative for substance use across the board, including their response to riding in a vehicle with someone else under the influence. Based on the information we received, all students participating were screened with Part B of the CRAFT, which accounts for the 0 response being so high. It's important to note that in Part A, students simply report a yes response to trying a substance and identifying how many days that substance was used, whereas this distribution is asking about individual motivation and behaviors that tend to be subjective. Next slide, please. So for the tobacco and nicotine results, students who answered 1 or more days in response to using a vaping device containing nicotine or flavors, or use of any commercial tobacco products on the Part A pre-screening were screened with 10 questions about tobacco products in Part C of the CRAFT 2.1 plus N, and those questions are reflected here. And next slide, please. Excuse me, I'm gonna take a drink of water. So you'll notice right off the bat that a portion of the responses in Part C had to be suppressed. Less students were screened in Part C of the tool, so it's harder to make clear connections in this section. Of students who reported commercial tobacco and nicotine use in the previous 12 months, 62% identified that they have tried to quit but couldn't. 63% identified that they use commercial tobacco and nicotine now because it is so hard to quit. 50% identified that they felt like they were addicted to vaping or commercial tobacco. 45% identified that they have had strong cravings to vape or use commercial tobacco. And 34% of students identified that they have felt like they really needed to vape or use commercial tobacco. We thought it was interesting that although 50% of students reported that they felt like they had a nicotine use disorder, less said they felt like they really needed to use or had difficulty not using. And additionally, since questions 7A through 7D asked about behaviors associated with stopping or refraining from use, it's possible that there are fewer responses here because less students who screen positive have ever tried to stop for any period of time. And next slide, please. So based on student responses in Part B and Part C of the CAPT, providers then recorded what actions were taken and or if any follow-up referral was made. And this was the guide that they used. Next slide. Based on the trajectory of one or more brief interventions conducted with the student, school-based health center providers then selected any appropriate treatment referrals from a drop-down menu consisting of the following options. So in-school counseling, following up with the school-based health center provider, a student intervention reintegration program, which is a restorative program that uses the Prime for Life curriculum for tobacco or vaping use. Students were referred to a cessation program like My Life, My Quit. It's important to remember here that following the treatment trajectory for students that received a referral was beyond the scope of this project. However, based on the small number of students who needed a follow-up referral, school-based health centers reported that there were adequate resources available to meet that need, which is really great news for this project. Next slide, please. This graph shows the actions taken. 86.72% of students received positive reinforcement for non-use. This aligns with other state and national data that suggests the majority of adolescents are not engaged in any substance use. 37.5% each receiving a brief intervention and referral. And this is promising because it means that every student who received a brief intervention was referred to some type of follow-up, even if that was simple as receiving a follow-up with a provider. This potentially reinforces the benefit of that relationship building and accessibility piece that is built into the school-based health center model. Next slide. So these next few slides are pulled together from the qualitative reports that our sites completed, and again are intended to help inform the feasibility and transferability of SBIRT in school-based settings, but also in other clinical settings that serve youth. So of note, all sites grew their enrollment in their school-based health center. One school updated their substance use policy from a zero tolerance to a more restorative approach, which is an exciting piece of this. And the project provided an opportunity for positive relationship building with students, hopefully impacting the protective factor of connection to school and caring adults. Next slide. Some of the challenges identified were difficulty motivating students to take the screening, staff turnover, and the perception that students may not have always responded honestly. Next slide. Some of the takeaways, we think that we really need to figure out how to integrate this protocol with the electronic health records of centers while still being able to protect confidentiality. Additional administrative support was vital to implementation here. We also feel that we need to figure out a way to adapt the protocol to each individual site and find a way to educate the adolescent patients about the confidentiality protections they have around substance use in Maine. And next slide. So our next steps. So all 3 of our year 1 participants have signed on for a second year of implementation, and we have also been able to add an additional 3 sites. Also, we hope to recruit at least 2 college health centers to pilot SBIRT. The project coordinator is developing a protocol for implementation with the young adult population, as that differs slightly from what we've been doing with the younger groups. And we'll be seeking institutional review board approval soon. The project coordinator's role in the first year has been really thinking about what tools the public health field needs to be able to implement quality SBIRT to fidelity, which has included considering ways to improve and streamline opportunities for training and technical assistance. This summer, our team partnered with a local expert to create an orientation video aligned with this project that was shared with pilot participants and is available as a resource to support school-based screening. Additionally, we're working with our training partner to coordinate and professionally film a handful of brief intervention demonstration videos to support providers in conducting these interviews based in best practice motivational interviewing techniques. Our team has been actively exploring some longer-term data collection solutions that would alleviate some of the challenges around the current process and move towards sustainability for this project among school-based health centers. And finally, I can't end without acknowledging our MySPR project coordinator, Steph Tucker, who she's on here somewhere. She deserves all of the credit for this amazing work. What she's been able to accomplish in less than 2 years is truly astounding, and I and Maine CDC are so grateful to her for this work. So we have, as you can tell, we have a ton of additional process documents that we're happy to share with anyone that's interested. Feel free to reach out to me or to Steph Tucker, again, who's the project coordinator, with any follow-up. We really appreciate the time and attention to this project that we've been so passionate about and have been excited to see how it's out over the last year. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Megan. And just a couple of brief takeaways. One, I love the idea of sort of such a large percentage of people who got sort of the positive reinforcement, right? I think it's such an important part. It's not just about like the referral piece of this, but it's also reinforcing the positive behaviors and healthy decision-making that people are already engaging in. I think it also underscores sort of the SBI side of SBIRT. In your sample, I mean, looking at the patterns that people were reporting, that sort of SUD treatment side obviously was a small component, but there's still tremendous value in the brief intervention, sort of understanding what's going on. And then what are the other services that people could be referred to support what might be driving some of their decision making. So I think it really is such a nice model that connects sort of prevention across to services and treatment as well. So really appreciate what you all are learning there, and excited that the schools didn't run away, that they said, oh, we'll do it again. That's really encouraging, that they see value, even, with some logistics challenges, they see value in doing it. So hopefully we can have you back in the future to hear about even more progress and impacts that you've had on that. So once again, thanks so much to Rob and Pat, Michelle, and Megan for joining us today. I want to just, before we end, highlight a few things that are upcoming. In the prevention space, SAMHSA's Prevention Day is scheduled for February 3rd of 2025. So please be ready to join us and thousands of others to talk about the prevention work and really kick off 2025 in a positive direction and momentum for raising up the importance of prevention. National Prevention Week is already slated for May 11th through the 17th of next year. Again, another opportunity to highlight the prevention work. And then Red Ribbon Week from our colleagues at DEA is ending tomorrow, but you can still participate in their campus video PSA contest until November 4th. And as we launched Prevention Month earlier this month, we actually released a toolkit on SAMHSA's Substance Use Prevention Month webpage. You can still use those throughout the year. It doesn't have to stop on October 31st. So please take advantage of those tools. And then lastly, another thing that is coming up in January is the next cycle of our Communities Talk to Prevent Alcohol and Other Drug Use initiative. And the Communities Talk supports community-based organizations, colleges and universities, local coalitions, state-based organizations, and local chapters of national organizations to host prevention activities throughout the country. We provide small stipends to help support that work. You can register and host your own prevention activities, and we'll be hosting a kickoff webinar in December where you can learn more about the Communities Talk initiative. But we do have a short video just to, hopefully whet your appetite for the Communities Talk work. So I'll ask the team to play that video.
Looking to get your community involved with substance use prevention? Participate in Communities Talk and make an impact. Share your hashtag #MyPreventionStory. Organizations in small towns and big cities alike are doing important, life-changing, and life-saving substance use prevention work every day. Boys and Girls Club of Southeast Alabama hosted their sheriff to discuss prevention. United Way of Broward County in Florida hosted an interactive day of learning. Keck Graduate Institute in California hosted a campus block party to connect students to resources. Holistic Evolution Inc. in Northwest Indiana educated their community about social determinants of health and how addressing health disparities supports equitable health outcomes. With a Communities Talk event, you can Encourage collaboration among local leaders, parents, educators, and youth to prevent substance use. Offer resources to help communities make healthy choices. Promote prevention through evidence-informed strategies and programs. Find out about hosting your own Communities Talk event. www.samhsa.gov/communities-talk. Planning stipends available in January.
Please check out the Communities Talk webpage where you can find more information on that. And once again, thanks very much to all of our presenters. Appreciate everybody else who joined and stayed engaged. We will have this recording posted on SAMHSA's YouTube page in the coming weeks, and slides will also be shared. So once again, thank you so much for everybody who has lifted up prevention during Prevention Month. And more than that, thanks for everything you're doing in communities every day to advance our prevention work. Have a wonderful week.